Well, a very good morning to you. It's Friday, April 7th, 2017. I'm Richie Allen. Hope you're well this Friday morning. This is a special programme, a special broadcast, if you will. David Icke is going to join us today for the best part of the next hour to talk about what happened overnight in Syria. So you can tweet me at any time. We are live. It's just after 10 a.m. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. You can email richie at richieallen.co.uk. All right, let's get on with it then.
Broadcasting live from the great city of Manchester, England. This is the Richie Allen Show on davidicke.com.
All right, so it's this morning's then, April 7th, when people were getting up to go about their business here in the UK. This is what they were waking up to. This is Sky News.
Very good morning to you. This is Sunrise. The main news today: America strikes the Assad regime. The US launches 59 Tomahawk missiles at a Syrian airbase in retaliation for the chemical weapons attack. President Trump condemns Bashar al-Assad for attacking innocent civilians and calls for an international response to end the Syria conflict.
I call on all civilized nations to join us in seeking to end the slaughter and bloodshed in Syria.
The US president broke off from meeting his Chinese counterpart, saying he acted to protect America. The governor of Homs says the attack on the airbase killed 5 people and wounded 7 more. Britain has backed the action, but Russia says the US has violated international law.
Right. Okay, so that's Sky News. Now, we will hear from the UK Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, but not before we hear from David Icke. Before we hear from David, this is what Trump had to say. The audio isn't marvellous, but that's down to issues with the capturing of that audio by the broadcasters in America. This is Trump.
On Tuesday, Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad launched a horrible chemical weapons attack on innocent civilians. Using a deadly nerve agent, Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children. It was a slow and brutal death for so many. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer such horror. Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched. It is in this vital national security interest of the United States to prevent and deter the spread and use of deadly chemical weapons. There can be no dispute that Syria used banned chemical weapons.
There can be no dispute, said Trump. Now, joining me live from the Isle of Wight, he's breaking off from writing his latest book and from a little bit of downtime in between events on the Worldwide Wake Up Tour, is my friend and colleague, David Icke. David, good morning, mate, and thanks for doing this. Thanks for coming on. How are you?
I'm good, Richie, but the world isn't. I have been watching the coverage this morning, including that on Russia Today, and it is extraordinarily depressing that the media is so clueless of the dots that can be so easily connected to put the events of the last few hours in context. We are told, for a start, that this is something that they are sure about. There's no dispute. But even on the story itself, never mind the response to it, there are enormous questions about what actually happened. First of all, the biggest question that any sane person would ask. What did Assad have to gain by launching a chemical attack on civilians? He, with Russian help, has been after this long and incessant war on Syrian sovereignty. He's been having success after success, clearing the terrorists out of Aleppo, moving across and clearing them out of Palmyra again, and moving against other terrorist areas. So he had nothing to gain by a chemical attack on civilians, because he is not a stupid man. He obviously realizes that when the Western world in general, and particularly Britain, America, Israel, Turkey, etc., want rid of you so badly that the last thing you need to do, especially now when things were going so much better, was to give them an excuse to do what they've just done. So the whole basis of why Assad would do that is ludicrous, and no one has asked or answered that question of why he would do it. Then you look at the pictures and the sources of the official story of what happened from the Western American EU-funded white helmets, from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is one man, a Assad-hating man in fricking Coventry, not even in Syria. Then you've got a doctor who, if you go to my headlines page today, you'll see a story on that. A doctor who's been hailed as a hero for treating people after the attack, who is or was a part of a group, it was claimed, and this became part of a court hearing, which eventually didn't go to the end because prosecution witnesses didn't give evidence. But he was connected to a group that kidnapped the British reporter John Catlin. And then you look at a video this doctor made when he's saying all this is happening and this sarin attack and it's mayhem. Well, what is he doing making a video when that's happening if he's a doctor? And then you look at the fact that he was tweeting at the same time, saying this is the latest from the sarin attacks, patients still flooding in, our hospital getting full from the sarin attack today. Anyone that wants evidence, I will video call you. And then you look at the pictures of people like the white helmets who are directly touching people who were told have died from the sarin gas. And against that, with no protection, by the way. And then you look at the sarin gas protocol, which I got out this morning. Sarin is a nerve agent that causes severe disruption to the nervous system and interferes with muscle control and organ function. Exposure to even small doses of sarin can be lethal. Damage can occur within 1 minute of exposure. And the same protocol says that gas masks will only protect the eyes and lungs. Normal clothes provide little to no protection, as sarin will penetrate clothing and be absorbed across any body surface. And there's the pictures of people with no protection whatsoever, just normal clothing, these white helmets, etc., directly touching these bodies of people who have apparently been killed by the sarin attack. People are told to wear protective clothing, including a respirator. That's not what we see. And use heavy rubber gloves for protection. If possible, decontaminate in an area away from where treatment will be given. None of which we've seen. Now, I'm not saying that that there was no gas attack. We don't know that yet. What is very clear, however, is that there is fundamental doubt even about the basic story, never mind who did it, from those pictures we've seen in relation to what must happen in terms of protecting yourself from a sarin attack and sarin gas. And what we are looking at, Richie, is a time warp. We are now back in 2003. We're back in the early 1990s with the Gulf War, 2003 with the invasion of Iraq. We are back with the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to justify an invasion. We're back with Bush and Blair. I mean, that clip, Richie, that you've just played of Trump justifying the attack could have been George Bush.
Yeah.
Could have been Tony Blair. Could have been Obama and Clinton justifying the mass murder from the air in Libya. It's the same process, problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem or the illusion of a problem. They both work. Get the public to react to the problem. And the thing they're really trying to get when you're trying to get a reaction in problem, reaction, solution, you want an emotional reaction. Because emotion doesn't do critical thinking. It just reacts. And that's why it's all emotion. That's why Trump's talking about beautiful babies and in that horrific speech. And we are looking at something that is actually the reverse of what appears to be happening. When I asked the question, what would Assad benefit or gain from doing this? The answer is, of course, nothing. But it brings us to a key question, which is the antidote for problem, reaction, solution, which is who benefits? Who benefits from something happening, and who benefits from us believing the official story of why it happened? And the answer to that question today is that alleged gas attack was for the benefit and only for the benefit of those that want to remove Assad from power and take control of the entirety of Syria. That's who benefits, and that's why it has happened. We have had no effort at getting congressional approval for that attack last night. No approval in any way, shape, or form was sought by Trump and his crazies. They just did it. Why? Because they did not want to wait until there was more investigation into the background of the attack. Yeah. As the UN have said, we don't know yet even what the delivery system was for the attack. They don't want to wait around until, as they say in the media, don't let too many phone calls spoil a good story. In other words, don't check it out because the story might not stand up then and you can't publish it. And it's the same principle. Don't let too long go before you respond, because if you do, then your justification of that response gets destroyed. And it's interesting that, you know, I'm seeing people this morning saying, people said Hillary Clinton would have taken us into a war with Russia and they voted for Trump because they thought he wouldn't. And look what's happened. You know, there at some point, I mean, it is happening more and more as I go around the world, I'm seeing it. But at some point, the collective human psyche and the collective psyche of the pathetic mainstream media will have to realize that this world is not controlled by the forces that you see. It's controlled by the forces in the unseen that work their agenda through the forces and the here today, gone tomorrow people that you see. And on that basis, there is no difference between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, to the point that very shortly before these attacks by the US on Syria were launched, Hillary Clinton was on American television calling for US attacks on Syrian air bases in response to the so-called Assad gas attacks.
And the no-fly zone she wanted. She was calling for a no-fly zone too, David, wasn't she?
Yeah. And of course, they want a no-fly zone because the whole point of what is going on, there are many points, but the key point of what is going on in the Middle East, as I have been writing and saying for year after year after year, is they want World War III. This is what their agenda has been all along. This is why you cannot divorce what is happening in Syria now from the incessant demonization of Russia over and over and over again in every way, shape, or form. And I think it might be helpful, Richie, for those that are not aware of this bigger picture, if I just laid out as briefly as I can the dots, the connections, which have led us absolutely to what has happened today. First of all, in September 2000, there was an organization in America called the Project for the New American Century. These were people like Robert Kagan and William Crystal, people like Paul Wolfowitz, Dov Zakheim, and others that ended up, Rumsfeld, another one.
Richard Pearl, yeah.
A few months later, in the Bush administration, in key positions in the Pentagon. You had Rumsfeld as defense secretary. You had Wolfowitz as his deputy. You had Dov Zakheim controlling the whole of the budget as comptroller of the Pentagon. And just months before they came to power with Bush, through this organization called the Project for the New American Century, they produced a document calling for a series of major theater wars that America would fight to regime change in country after country after country. American forces, they said, to fight and decisively win multiple simultaneous major theater wars. And these were some of the countries that they named that they wanted to regime change in that way: Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, North Korea, China. A few months later, as I say, these very same people came to power with the Bush administration. And another thing that they said in this document in September 2000 is that to justify these regime changes, they would have to, in effect, create an event that would justify it. In the words of the document, further, the process of transformation is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And 9 months after those people came to power with Bush, 1 year to the month after that document was produced, they had in America what Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century, 9/11. As a result of that, they justified the so-called war of terror, which has systematically picked off country after country on that same list, justifying it for different reasons. And of course, then we had the revelations by General Wesley Clark, a NATO Supreme Allied Commander at one point, who said in 2007 that he visited the Pentagon immediately after 9/11, just a few days. And he saw Rumsfeld, he saw Wolfowitz, and then he met a general, a friend of his, on the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, who told him days after 9/11 they were going to invade Iraq. Why, says Clark, what's the connection with Iraq? And the general said he didn't know, and he probably didn't through this fierce compartmentalization of knowledge. A few weeks later, by this time the United States is in Afghanistan, Clark said on this TV program, he went back to the Pentagon and he met the same general. And he said to the general, why aren't we invading Iraq? I thought we were going to invade Iraq. Oh, it's worse than that, sir, said the general, picking up a piece of paper. We've just had this down from upstairs. In other words, Rumsfeld's office, Secretary of Defense. We're going to attack 7 countries in 5 years. And who was on that list? Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, and so on. And as Clark said on this program, the Project for the New American Century was involved in a coup. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. And that's what's happened since. And the reason, you see, that Bush and Blair lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was because Iraq was on the list. It was right at the beginning of the list. And they had no credible reason to invade Iraq. And so they made one up. That is why they did it. And we have had a media that has been hoaxed once. Well, hoaxed the great majority who are clueless. Some of them actually know what's going on and support it. But they've been hoaxed once over Iraq. And now they're being hoaxed again in exactly the same way. I mean, I scan my eyes across the mainstream media in search for a brain cell on active duty, and I have failed to find one so far, particularly in the last few days.
It's dreadful this morning, David.
Then we move on. We move on to Libya. It's another one on the list. They wanted to get rid of Gaddafi, and so they funded armed and trained terrorists and mercenaries to attack Gaddafi, at which point there was silence. And then when Gaddafi responded to those attacks, you couldn't get a microphone quick enough. He's killing his own people. What are they saying about Assad now? He's killing his own people. Now, here's another point. By the time they are ticking Libya off the original list, it's no longer Bush and Blair. It's Obama and Cameron and Hillary Clinton. The parties have changed, the personnel has changed, but the same agenda and the same list of targets are being ticked off. Why? Because these are here today, gone tomorrow gophers. It's that which is always there that is orchestrating this, and that's why nothing changes. When they've done for Gaddafi, then they move on into Syria, with a lot of the people that had been the so-called rebels in Libya moving to Syria to carry on there. Again, now we have another one on the list being ticked off. And then we come to Roland Dumas, the former French Minister for Foreign Affairs, on French television, who said the following about the British connection to the systematic triggering of this war in Syria, so-called civil war. Actually, it's a proxy war for the West to remove Assad, as per list. He said, I'm going to tell you something. I was in England 2 years before the violence in Syria on other business. I met with top officials who confessed to me that they were preparing something in Syria. This was in Britain, not in America. Britain was organizing an invasion of rebels into Syria. They even asked me, although I was no longer Minister for Foreign Affairs, if I would like to participate. Naturally, I refused. This is all before it started. And he goes on to talk about the connection to Israel. But let me quote from this. This is 1 month. This is a U.S. Special Forces unconventional warfare strategy from November the 30th, 2010. This is 1 month before the so-called Arab Spring began in Tunisia. This is what it says. The U.S. military's unconventional warfare strategy requires that target state population perceptions are first groomed into accepting an armed insurrection, using propaganda and political and psychological efforts to discredit the government, creating local and national agitation, helping organize boycotts, strikes, and other efforts to suggest public discontent before advisors and foreign propaganda, material, money, and weapons and equipment are brought in. This is exactly what's happened in country after country. And this document goes on to say this, that if the regime that you are targeting responds, like Gaddafi and Assad, why wouldn't they respond? Then you use that for your benefit. This is what it says. if retaliation by the target government occurs, the resistance can exploit the negative consequences to garner more sympathy and support from the population by emphasizing the sacrifices and hardship the resistance is enduring on behalf of the people. He's killing his own people. Now, this is where it went pear-shaped, Richie, for them. And this is how we ended up with what has happened today. The crucial point was when Vladimir Putin could see where this was going. And of course, they have bases in Syria. He could see where this was going. He could see that actually the so-called coalition led by the US wasn't trying to remove ISIS from the Middle East and particularly from Syria, because the idea, as many insiders have confirmed, was to use the ISIS they created as a way of getting rid of Assad. And if Putin had not intervened, giving air support to the Syrian army, then Assad would have long gone by now, and the whole place would be overrun by these Saudi-funded, US-funded, completely insane ISIS madmen. But Putin did intervene. And as a result of that air power, the Syrian army has been able to push back these Western Saudi-funded, backed and armed terrorists, taking back Aleppo, pushing them out for a second time from Palmyra and pushing on. The whole strategy, Richie, of the Project for the New American Century, published in the year 2000, was going off kilter. It was going off the script because they thought that they would remove Assad pretty much as quickly, or not too longer, than they did Gaddafi. It hasn't worked. So we have a situation just a few days ago where Assad and Russia have been so successful in pushing ISIS back and gaining more and more ground that people like Tillerson, the present Secretary of State and oil executive, was saying for the first time that removing Assad will not be a prerequisite to finding some solution in Syria. It's the first time it's been said. So they have a problem. Assad is not going, and far from going, he's getting stronger and stronger with Russian support. So what do? You have a situation, problem, reaction, solution, where you, in some form, either setting it up or creating it in some way. This sarin gas attack, as claimed, based on no evidence whatsoever in terms of Assad being the perpetrator. And you use that as quickly as you can. Like I said earlier, mate, don't let it go too long, because your justification will be diluted by evidence and research. Yeah. So that's why we've had it. It's precisely to get this Project for the New American Century agenda back on track, where it was falling apart. And if they use this now to justify the removal of Assad through military means, where does that leave Russia, China, etc.? Are they going to take that? And as I've said for so long, that the plan all along has been to create a World War III out of the Middle East and this very area that we're talking about. But also, of course, another country, and in many ways the prize country on that Project for the New American Century wish list, was Iran. Iran, of course, that is closely connected to Russia and also to China. Iran that's involved in supporting Assad. And if Syria goes as a result of this this hoax, then it will be Iran next and Lebanon, because that also on the list. This is the background, Rich. I've talked for a long time. Sorry about that.
No, mate, it's important. It's important.
But these dots have to be connected before a single incident like we've had in the last few hours can be seen in its true context.
It's vital because absent of you doing it, nobody else is doing it. The breakfast television programs this morning were overrun by people explaining why this was a very measured, careful and appropriate response to what happened. I'm going to do a very quick recap. Then we're going to hear from Michael Fallon briefly before we hear more from David about where this is going. It's exactly 10:30. The only reason I note the time is because this will be on David's YouTube channel when it's finished. It'll be on mine as well, and we'll have it on podcast and everywhere else. But of course, things are happening all the time, so I don't want you to think that we're out of the loop. As we're live, this is what's happening. 59 Tomahawk missiles launched against an airbase near Homs yesterday. People have died. We don't know how many. Some estimates saying 10, 12, 5, 7. The United States saying that they know that the Assad government launched a chemical attack and that's why we had to do it. You heard David talk about that there. Now, just before we came on air to chat, Michael Fallon, the UK Defence Secretary, gave his response to it to Sky News. There are two short clips. I would ask you to listen very carefully to what he says, particularly in the second clip. This is Michael Fallon earlier.
We've seen the first test of the Trump administration here, faced with the first gas attack, and there have been previous uses of gas by the Assad regime in Syria, flouting international law. This is the first time it's happened under the Trump administration, and they've decided that they want to help deter it in future. So this was a very limited, very appropriate, narrowly focused action to attack the airfield, the aeroplanes and the equipment that the United States believe was involved in the gas attack, to deter the regime from future attacks and hopefully therefore to save lives in future.
Now, Stephen Dixon was conducting the interview there, regular Sky presenter. Dixon then asked the obvious question: what about the UK's participation going forward?
Well, we work with the United States in the international coalition against terrorism in Iraq and Syria. This particular action was taken by the United States on their own. They did not ask for our assistance, but the President himself last night in his television appealed to all countries now to redouble their efforts to bring about a political settlement in Syria. This civil war there has gone on for more than 5 years. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Millions of people have been displaced from their homes. Half the country has been destroyed. And we've all now got to work much harder to bring about a future democratic settlement in Syria in which President Assad will play no part.
David, what do you reckon?
Well, Michael Fallon is a classic example of what I'm talking about, the complete irrelevance of their existence, except as vehicles to articulate an agenda from the shadows. If it wasn't Michael Fallon, if it was someone else, a Labour or Liberal Democrat, they'd probably be saying the same. So we've got to go beyond the here today, gone tomorrow politicians, because they are just gophers for this hidden hand in the background. And compartmentalization is so fierce in terms of knowledge of it. I've been investigating it now for 30 years nearly, that many of these people will be also clueless. They'll just be briefed by their always there civil service. And they just repeat it. Michael Fallon, if there's a reshuffle, he'll go and be an expert on something else he knows nothing about in another department. And the hypocrisy is staggering. You have him there, like all Western politicians, nose in the air, full of their own self-purity. We have Theresa May, who's just been given apparently the highest civilian honor by Saudi Arabia, the very country that has helped to create ISIS in conjunction with the West. And let's not forget this. This is not Islam we're talking about. This is Saudi Arabian Islam, the Wahhabi version of Islam that only goes back to the 18th century. And that's why the beheading, women suppressing to the extreme, and all the horrific things that go on in Saudi Arabia are mirrored by the behavior of ISIS. They're mirrors of each other because ISIS is an extension of the Saudi Arabian regime and the Saudi Arabian made up version of Islam, which then gets the whole of Islam. I mean, I'm not into any religion, but tars the whole of Islam with the same perception of violent extremism. And you've got Theresa May, who of course will be in front of the microphones and the cameras soon, pontificating in just the same way from her illusory moral high ground. And you have Donald Trump as well, who's talking about beautiful babies dying and how this is unacceptable. And they're both arming to the teeth the very Saudi Arabian regime that is causing such death, destruction, yes, for beautiful babies, in Yemen day after day after day. This is the same Trump regime that's supporting what is happening in Mosul, in Iraq, which is causing mass civilian casualties to beautiful babies. The hypocrisy is unbelievable, but they don't want you to connect the dots. They don't want you to do this. I mean, for a mainstream media not to be connecting the most blatantly obvious dots to anyone with half a brain cell on active duty is either the height of stupidity or they know they're doing it. And it's probably a mixture of both. But not to be able to see this is insane. How can you not say to Fallon when he comes out and says things like that, but hold on a minute, look what you're arming to happen in Yemen? Never. Or what about these 200 civilians in Mosul that were killed in one US airstrike recently? No mention either side of the Atlantic in terms of the media. If the media is worth its existence at all, it's to call out the hypocrisy of power. It's to call out the abuse of power, and they will not do it. And there are consequences for not doing that, because now we have a situation, I've just seen this this morning, where Putin has called this attack completely unjustified, and he's called it out in his wording exactly as it is. And he's also suspended this flight safety memorandum agreement they had with the United States for making sure that there's not a problem with Russian and US planes flying in Syria.
Yeah.
So we've taken another step towards what I've been warning about all these years, which is the manipulation of World War III out of the Middle East, other areas too, but particularly out of the Middle East. And this is why we've had the demonization of Russia. You see, once Trump, who's probably, he's a narcissistic egomaniac, and actually he's not just an egomaniac, he has a very, very fragile ego, which is very dangerous when you are commander-in-chief of the biggest military in the world by a mile. But he's clueless about the bigger picture. He's just putty in the hands of these people, like Mad Dog Mattis and McMaster, his national security advisor. So when you look at what Trump is doing, he's probably just following what he's told, because he hasn't got the ability to work it out. But there he is, and surely it's not difficult to see the contradiction, talking about dead people in Syria while simultaneously being involved in killing people in Yemen day after day after day. We need to start putting aside this whole idea of politics, of left against right. There'll be people coming out today from the left in America saying, see, we should have had Hillary.
Yeah.
They're still clueless that actually they are just masks on the same face following the same agenda. So, as I was saying about World War III, we are probably closer to that today than we've ever been. And what will count on this now is the response of Russia and China to what has happened.
Which will probably, which might be measured. I want to, because you mentioned the media, and we are going to talk in a couple of minutes about the independent media, and you're certainly more measured and more matured than I am, and we'll get to that. There are a couple of clips I think worth playing. The first one is only a few seconds long. It's something I heard on BBC Radio 5 Live Breakfast yesterday. This is Nicky Campbell. This is what David was saying. Stephen Dixon is not asking any questions this morning of Michael Fallon about the hypocrisy of talking about the deaths of children and babies. This is Nicky Campbell on Radio 5 Live Breakfast yesterday, talking to a fictitious man, a man who allegedly fought with the YPG Kurds and is somehow an expert on what's happening in Syria. And we're not going to hear from that guy, but this is Campbell, and I did mean it. I never heard anything like this before.
What else you can do to get rid of him? And clearly we need to get rid of him, don't we? He's a war criminal.
You spent years at the BBC, David, in news, in sport, breakfast television, presenting prime-time sports programmes. I think I said last night, even though they've always, well, particularly in the last 20, 25 years, we've seen what they've become. There was a time when he'd have been fired for that, right?
Yeah, I mean, the BBC's always been a tool of government, but it's a matter of scale. You know, when I worked at the BBC, there was still substance. There was still a willingness to question power. And if a news presenter had have said what Campbell just said back in those days, it would be instant dismissal.
Gone.
What it is now, what it's become is instant accolade or instant promotion, because that's what they want. We've gone past the journalist and the news presenter who questions all sides equally fairly and equally vigorously. Now we are. We have the commentator host who is telling people what they should believe. And people like Campbell, every day, they get up in the morning and they take their point of reference as the official version of everything. And what do we see with CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and all of these people? Exactly the same. And this is why they want to use this fake news hoax to silence the alternative media, the genuine alternative media, that is offering people a different narrative and a different explanation. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the media is made up of men and women who have families, who have children, who have grandchildren, and their dereliction of duty to do their job is going to have consequences, because if you don't call out power and abuses of power, then a power then goes on abusing ever more extremely. And so the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq in 2003, if we had a proper journalistic media in the mainstream who did the research and called them out, they could have dismantled the excuse to go into Iraq, kill and maim all those people, and trigger the series of events that led to the catastrophe that is now the Middle East. Now, today, in the last few days, they've had the opportunity from the experience of being hoaxed once, well, more than once, but particularly then, to actually go down a different road and call out power. And say, when they say there's no doubt about it, say, well, okay, show us your evidence. But they don't, because they're going down the same road. Why? Because they are pathetic. And a lot of it is ignorance. You know, they get their views from the 24-hour rolling news on the newsroom telly or the morning papers. And anyone that's challenging that narrative, people like me, they're crazy and to be laughed at, ridiculed and dismissed. I mean, what we have is, again, what I've long called the human disease, the arrogance of ignorance, the ignorance of what's going on in the world because you just take what people tell you in the mainstream and believe it, and the arrogance that anything beyond that must be crazy and can't be true. Once again, arrogance and ignorance have consequences because this is leading inevitably to a global conflict, because that's what this Project for the New American Century process has been all about.
David, that's a brilliant
World
lead-in.
wars to transform global society and to put into place a world government and a world army dictatorship on the grounds and the justification of we must stop this ever happening again. Look at the First World War. Look at the centralization of power justified after it. Same after the Second World War. And the Third World War is there to complete the job of total centralization of global power, dictating the fine detail of everybody's lives. Think of a global version of the European Union, for instance, and worse. And these are the consequences of ignorance. And they're trying to shut the alternative media down, yes, but they haven't quite done it yet. And therefore, ignorance is still a choice.
It is still a choice,
Get informed, for goodness sake, or take the consequences and let your children take the consequences of being uninformed about what's actually happening before your eyes.
This segues brilliantly into a clip I'm going to play now, which is 90 seconds long. David was talking there about the using of the first two world wars and the coming third world war to lay out this new order of a global governance system. Richard Haas is very significant in this. He's the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, if you've been reading David's books over the years, the last 15, 20 years, you'll know all about the round table and you'll know all about the groups that came out of that, like the Council on Foreign Relations, and the influence it has in laying out the agenda for the puppet politicians that David was talking about earlier. Now, Haas has written this book called A World in Disarray. It was published this year. I doubt it's worth the paper it's written on, but he has written a book, A World in Disarray. And only a few weeks ago, at the headquarters of the Council on Foreign Relations, he gave an interview to somebody about the book and about how he saw the world today and how he saw the world going forward. So I'm going to play this. It's only 90 seconds long. It endorses much of what David has been saying for a long, long time. And I'd love to get David's comments on it because he hasn't heard this. David hasn't heard this clip. This is a live Richie Allen show, by the way, broadcasting live on Fab Radio in Manchester, on TuneIn Radio, my own website, davidicke.com as well. And we're here because of what happened overnight in Syria, where Tomahawk missiles slammed into an airfield near Homs. People have been killed. The United States blaming the for us, the obvious false flag accusations of a chemical attack by Assad. Listen to Richard Haas, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. This only about 6 weeks ago.
After the 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalia in the mid-17th century, you had this major innovation. It really was the great big idea of its era, and that was the idea of forming nation states and that they would be based on this concept of sovereignty. And sovereignty had two dimensions. Essentially, countries would not use force to change the borders. And second of all, they would respect those borders, that what happened within the territorial confines of a fellow nation state was their business. Essentially, it was a mutual hands-off society. And that was a big idea. It may not sound like much, but before then, you had a world of non-stop intervention. So this actually was a constructive, big idea. And for the last few hundred years, this has been the basic structural idea of what I would call World Order 1.0. It was often violated, World War II obviously being the most dramatic. More recently, Saddam's invasion of Kuwait, Russian action in Crimea. But it still was the ordering principle. And my argument is it's necessary but not sufficient. That in a world of globalization, increasingly what goes on inside any country is no longer its business alone. And my purpose is not to say we want to get involved in its politics, but think about it. If there's terrorists operating out of that country,
pandemics,
right. climate change, if they're having tremendous amount of coal-fired generating plants with hackers. Basically, you can't use your territory as something to hide behind. So my argument is we have to respect it, but if sovereign states are going to derive the benefit of sovereignty, they've also got to meet the obligations. And what I'm arguing is that this ought to be now the next operating principle for the world. I call it World Order 2.0.
Sovereign obligation.
Sovereign obligation. And this ought to inform the consultations the United States has with others.
World Order 2.0, David. It's interesting that he said what we know as centuries of British imperialism and mass murder, he described it as interventionism has always been there, had always been there previously. That endorses everything you've written about for much of the last 25 years and what you said in the first 45 minutes today.
Well, whatever Richard Haas says is bad for humanity, but it's worth listening to him because he's telling you what the agenda is. He's giving it as an opinion of how things should be, just like Soros and just like Zbigniew Brzezinski. This is what I think should happen. What they're telling you is what is planned to happen. It's interesting there. He says climate change. This is what I've been saying all these years, that climate change caused by humans is a hoax. And people say, why is it a hoax? Why would they do that? He's just told you. It's one of the means they are going to justify the world government with, by saying to save the planet, we must have a world government that imposes climate law on everyone. This is just one of the ways that they're planning to justify the world government. But another name is very much involved in what Haas was talking about there, George Soros. George Soros, of course, who comes up all over the place when it comes to manipulating this agenda onwards. And I was writing about this in one of my books, maybe 2 books ago, maybe. What Soros proposed just before the Arab Spring, by the way, which his organizations fundamentally helped to trigger under the cover of a people's revolution, when actually it was just the start of a proxy war by the West and the US against Middle Eastern countries, that list I'm talking about. Soros came out and said, we've got to change the nature and the perception of sovereignty. So we move the definition of sovereignty from a government to the people. Because when sovereignty was said to be the government, then you couldn't justify invading and overthrowing a government and say that you weren't basically destroying their sovereignty and attacking their sovereignty. Because the government was the sovereign entity. Once they moved it from the sovereign definition from the government to the people, now they could invade a country. Because no longer were they, under their definition, invading a sovereign nation. They were helping the people who were the sovereign nation to overthrow a government that was treating them badly and impinging on the sovereignty of the people. You see where I'm going with this? Different definition suddenly changes the whole game. And Soros started pushing that, which was then accepted just before this Arab Spring began. And then they could say, we're not going against the sovereignty because the sovereigns are the people. We're helping the people against the government. This is all connected.
This is the language they're using. I want to ask you, right, in the last few minutes, I want you to talk about the genesis of, maybe not the genesis of, but the evolution of the independent media, which I spend a lot of time, I think, talking about. Maybe I spend too much time talking about. But it seems that something called the alt-right has grown up. Celebrity has become hugely important in the independent media. People's status, their own celebrity, their own sense of self-worth. And it's led... I think that has some small part to play in how people who understood that no journalist worth his or her salt could ever endorse or should ever endorse a politician. Not to say that in a monologue you can't say, oh, well, I like what Sir Gerald Kaufman said about Palestine. I like that, and I like what this person said. Not saying that's not, plausible, but endorsing people. What's happened to the alt-right, the independent media, and what happened overnight with Trump and the firing of these Tomahawk missiles, and Trump saying that he's fallen hook, line and sinker for the nonsense about the chemical weapons? What's going on with this media, this so-called alternative to the mainstream?
Well, I've been shaking my head this morning as I watch the Trump supporting alternative media, and I put alternative in quotes. I don't consider it to be so. The Trump supporting alternative media running off in all directions, and many of them trying to distance themselves from him now. Oh, I'm finished with him now. Well, hold on. You helped to bring him to power.
Yeah.
You told people he was different. You bought the hoax. You bought the lies. And what we need is a reevaluation of the alternative media to reevaluate what alternative really means. And it's not getting pulled into the hoax of the left-right spectrum of politics, where you support a candidate. What we're here to do, the genuine alternative media, is to expose the fact that the whole system is rigged. And it doesn't matter who you vote for in terms of anyone that can form a government, the same hidden hand will always be there. And that's what we need to focus on. Not the here today, gone tomorrow people we see, but that which is always there. And, we need to have the ability to look at things dispassionately, look at things calmly, and look at things from the perspective of what is the best for everyone. And what we have in the alternative media, particularly the Trump supporting part of it, indeed the Trump supporting part of it, is not mature people calmly looking at things and seeing them for what they are. There are too many little boys in short trousers with megaphone mouths who think it's all about them.
Yeah.
I got news for them. It isn't. It's about what's best for humanity. Not what's best for you, not about the size of your audience. It's about what's best for humanity. And if there's a reason for the alternative media's existence, and my God, there is, it's to expose what is not being exposed, not to get on the bandwagon of that which we are trying to expose. How you can go year after year claiming that it doesn't matter who you vote for, the same force is in power, and then fall for supporting and promoting vigorously, to a very significant extent, I'm sure, in terms of voting support, someone who was blatantly just another insider telling you what you want to hear so you'll support him, so that immediately he gets power and doesn't need you anymore, he'll do what was going to happen all along. We have a narcissist. We have a deeply immature man. We have a child. We have a man-child in the White House. When he's there, he's usually in Florida. And that is incredibly dangerous. When you have a man-child surrounded by zealots who would give evil a bad name, then you've got a very combustible situation. And it's going to take intelligence and calmness from Russia and such countries to stop this heading to where this cabal wants it to go and has wanted it to go all along.
That was my final question, actually, my friend. That was what I was going to say last. I was going to say, how important is it now that the Russians, those around Putin, his advisors, how important is it that they say, right, let's pause, let's relax here and have a think about this?
Well, that's important. Putin will know what's going on. He said it in his statement this morning as much, that it was basically a hoax that they've used to justify this attack. He doesn't use those words, but he says that in the words he does use. Fortunately, as I've said many times, when you are the leader of Russia, for so long, you're not a Sunday school teacher. But what, thankfully, up to this point, we'll see where it goes from here. What we have in Putin is someone of intellectual intelligence, to the extent that he would have every one of the leaders and sycophants in the West for breakfast, dinner, and tea when it came to intelligence. And so I hope that continues. But you see, this is the point. When you have an agenda that has an end goal, see, calling events and how they're going to unfold becomes so much easier when you know what the goal is. When you know what the goal is and you know the techniques used to reach that goal, which is what I've been writing about for decades, calling the future becomes much easier than if you don't have that compass. And so although we may have a period of reflection now, this hidden hand wants World War III, and it will go on pushing. So when you have someone like Trump, who starts, for instance, giving in his campaign the idea that he wants to get closer to Russia and put the hatchet down, this is why you had all the frenzy that you had to make sure that was never going to happen. And Trump's just a baby. He's a baby in arms. Not a nice man, I don't think, but a baby in arms in terms of the people around him who once again are having him for breakfast, dinner, and tea. Putin's the key about where this goes, because if he loses it and he decides that he's going to play testosterone man to Trump's, then we are in real trouble.
Thanks for doing this and coming on. I really appreciate it, because genuinely, I know you're up to your absolute tonsils at the moment with a deadline looming. Let us remind us, the worldwidewakeup.com is the website. You are on the road pretty much all this year. Remind us where you're off to next.
I'm going to Sweden, very, very significant country in what is happening in Europe. I'm going there in a couple of weeks, and then I'm going on to Serbia. And what I'm finding, Richie, I've just come back from Croatia and Slovenia, is that in those Balkan countries, of course, who've had the treatment from the West, of course, another Blair American production. And I'm finding that there's much greater maturity there among people. And when I went to Croatia, and I found to my delight that there is a political party now with MPs in Parliament that was founded on the back of coming across my work.
That's right.
We are starting to make progress, but clearly from the events of today and the last few weeks, there's a hell of a lot of progress still needs to be made.
Cheers for doing this. By the way, if you just came in on the end of this, and I know a lot of people have come in on the end of it, it'll be on podcast very soon. It'll be on David Icke's YouTube channel. You should be subscribed to David Icke on YouTube anyway, and it'll be on our YouTube channel as well. We'll try and get it onto loads of different platforms. We never big ourselves up. It's not about bigging ourselves up, but what we've been talking about in the last hour, what we've been saying, it's not being said by anybody on national television and radio today anywhere. It isn't, and it needs to be said, and it needs to be heard. Thanks, mate. Look after yourself, and continued success to you and all the Worldwide Wake Up crew as well. Cheers, David.
Cheers, Rich.
And bye for now. Right, that was David Icke, my friend and colleague, who was on the line to us there from Ride on the Isle of Wight. Broke off from the looming deadline of his next book, and also preparing the very much organic and ever-changing Worldwide Wake Up tour. If you listen to me regularly, you'll know that I'm on holiday from now. I won't be around until the week after next. So, unless something happens and we need to get back on air to challenge what's happening and to present a different point of view, but I am due to be off for a few days. Have a good weekend. I would advise, as always, that you do stay in touch with people like David Icke through davidicke.com/headlines for the alternative view. Do that. And people, of course, like Paul Craig Robertson, Wayne Madsen, challenging the establishment narrative. Have a good rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend. my friend. Look after yourselves and one another, and spare a thought for, and I think I might have closed out the programme last night by saying this, spare a thought even for the people of Syria who are probably, their teeth are chattering because they're wondering, is this the end of it or is it just the beginning? Looking up in the skies all the time, terrified maybe to go outside their front door. In light of everything else that's happened in their country in the last 6-7 years, spare a thought for them. I'll be back with you in just over a week's time. Until then, bye for now, and thanks very much for tuning into this special programme. Bye now.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIcke.com.